Amen. All right. Diane, I'd invite you to come and read our first passage for this morning.
The first reading is from Romans 12, verses 1 through 8. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given to me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, then do it cheerfully. Here ends the reading.
Amen. Thank you, Diane. So our theme these weeks are stewardship, and stewardship is simply making wise use of the things that we've been entrusted with. And last week we talked about money, which is a really important thing in life, touches all aspects of most of what we do and hope to do. And it is perhaps more concrete and tangible and a lot easier to count than today's topic. But today's topic can cut a little bit closer to the bone, closer to the heart. We're talking about our time, our energy, our ability, our attention, our talent. In fact, we're talking about our whole life. The first before we talk about that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that passage from Romans, but I also want to read to you a familiar story from Mark's Gospel. It comes from chapter 25. I'm sure you've heard this story before, read in church or read it yourself in Scripture. And as you hear it again, I'd invite you to enter in imaginatively to what the characters in this story might be feeling. What were they thinking and feeling? What was going on for them emotionally as they were playing out their role in this story? It's Matthew 25, beginning at verse 14. I'm going to read from the English Standard Version. It says this: "It'll be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to their ability. And then he went away. And he who had received the 5 talents went at once, and he traded with them, and he made 5 more talents. So also he who had 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received 1 talent, he went, and he dug in the ground, and he hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came, and he settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. And the master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I've made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. Now I'll set you over much. enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had received 1 talent, came forward, and he said, Master, I knew that you were a hard man, reaping where you do not sow and gathering where you scatter no seed. And so I was afraid. And I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours. But the master said to him, Oh, you wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, or gather where I have no seed? Well, then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming you should have received what was mine plus interest. So take the talent away from him, he said to the others, and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and to he who has in abundance. But from the one who has not, even what they have will be taken away. And that one will be cast that worthless servant into the outer darkness, in a place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Kind of a hard story to hear sometimes. It's convicting to me. You imagine what's going on in the minds of these different characters, what their emotional life was like? I wonder if there's one of them that you resonate with. Here's a question that we ask our kids. Maybe we keep asking it. I ask it myself. What are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to be? What are you going to do with your life? It's a good question, and a good question I think that we ought to keep asking ourselves. I love this observation that Annie Dillard made. She said, how we spend our days, of course, is how we spend our lives. What we do with this hour and that one, that is what we are doing. She's right. The question of what do I do with my life is not something you ask and get settled early on and then go and do it. No, every hour, every day, we ask again, what do I do with this that's been entrusted to me? Well, the answer to the question, what should I do, is wrapped up closely to another question. It's a question that comes prior. It's a question of what story am I living in? We can't know what next step to take unless we know what story we're in. And the story we're living in is comprised of answers to questions like these. Where have I come from? Where am I going? What's going on? And so what should I do next? Now we can answer those questions in really mundane ways. Where have I come from? Michigan, near Detroit. What are you doing? The laundry. Where are you going? Out to walk the dog. What's next? Groceries. Then more laundry. Rinse, repeat. Not too inspiring. But whether we acknowledge it or not, and oftentimes we don't acknowledge it, regardless of how ordinary or humdrum our lives may seem, they are in fact wrapped in wondrous mystery. Profound, miraculous, awe-inspiring mystery. And when we lose touch with that mystery, then the questions take on a dull indifference. Where we've been or where we're going. We can get out of touch with that great story that we're a part of. The one that begins in mystery and ends in mystery. And when we're out of touch with that, we start living in other stories. Perhaps stories of regret over what we've done or what we've left undone. Disappointment about how things have turned out for us. Grief over what's lost. Worry about what we don't know or what we might lose. Anxiety about what comes next may not be something that we want. And all of those feelings, regret and disappointment and worry and grief and anxiety, they are legitimate feelings and emotions, and they have their place. Some of our stories differ from each other, and some of them are marked with regret and disappointment and grief, worry, anxiety. But they're not the whole story. If we allow them to become the whole story, even subconsciously, then we're not really living the story that God has put us on. I would say this, that stories that begin and end with those emotions are distorted stories. They're only part of the picture. True in part, but not of the whole. So what stories do we tell ourselves about what we're living in? Well, in this parable of Jesus, you can imagine what the three servants, what they must have been thinking or feeling. The first two, we're told, both did the same thing. At once, they went out and they traded with what they were given. Now, a talent was a lot of money. I forget what it was. A few years' wage, maybe. So to be given 5 talents was to be entrusted with a lot of money. Probably more money than I've seen at one time, except where I'm talking with the banker about our mortgage, you know? And here's someone entrusted with that, and what do? They go out and they do something completely uncertain. They trade. They engage with, they use this stuff to do things, not certain of how it will turn out, but certain that they've been given a lot, and they need to do something with it. So they go out eagerly and start trading. And both of them meet with success. We're told the master was gone for a long time. I imagine that each of them had some ups and downs on that journey. There might have been moments where they lost more than they gained, but they kept at it. And when the master returned after a long time, each had been able to double what they were entrusted with. What were they feeling? What were they thinking? Well, it must have been something like opportunity and possibility, some excitement, some gratitude for what they had been entrusted with, some confidence in themselves because the master had confidence in them. This is different than what the third fellow thought. He forgot who he was. He lived in a story that distorted things. He forgot who his master was. So when the master shows up, he comes and he's been slothful, but he pretends to be fearful. So he makes up a cover story. He says, "Oh, master, I knew you're a hard man. You reap where you don't sow, you gather where you've scattered no seed. So I was afraid. I went out and I hid your talent in the ground, and here I've got it for you. Here it is." Well, you know, so often I've read that parable this way, that the master says, "That's right. I am a hard man, and I reap where I don't sow. I harvest where I've put nothing in the ground, and now I'm going to take it out of your flesh. You owe me, you wicked and lazy servant. Go to the place where there's eternal torment and punishment. That's your wages." Well, that's not how it goes, I don't think. Rather, this third servant is so wrapped in a story that isn't true, he forgets even who his master is. I like the ESV that puts it back. The master says, "Oh, so you knew that I'm a hard man? I reap where I don't sow, gather where I scatter no seed?" Well, that's not true. If it were true, you should at least invest it in the bank, get some interest. But you didn't do that. You're using that as a cover story for your own laziness. So the slothfulness instills in the guy kind of a picture of his master as being irrational, mean, and demanding. I can imagine the master saying this to him. "Oh, is that right? Is that who you think I am? The guy that gave you a talent? I reap where I don't sow?" You've forgotten your Bible stories, haven't you? Did God ever demand from his people anything that he hadn't already given them? Of course not. Think of Adam and Eve. Were they challenged to create a garden out of nothing? Did God demand from them that they produce something that he hadn't already put in their hand? No. He only asked them to tend the things that he had already given to them, to see to its flourishing, to enter into the joy of the master of watching good stuff grow that he's already made. Is that what you think? that I would ask from you something that I haven't given you the ability to do? It's not who I am. He lived in a story that wasn't true. The truth is, his master, our master, never demands from us anything that we don't have. He doesn't ask us to be what we cannot be. He doesn't ask us to do what cannot be done. Just like Lennon and McCartney, right? Nothing you can do that can't be done. It's true. It's nothing we can do that can't be done. But we can do what can be done. Slothfulness grips this guy. He says it was fear. I don't think so. He had been given something, but he lost sight of the story. He allows it to get out of hand. Do you notice how it ends up, this story? The master turns to his other servants and says, take what he has, give it to those who know how to use it well, and cast him out to a place of darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Weeping and gnashing of teeth, that's not a sign of physical torment. That's a sign of emotional anguish. Because I think now the guy sees, oh gosh, I'm not being burnt alive here. I'm being eaten from the inside out because I've lost the opportunity that was entrusted to me. All the good possibility, the excitement of living in the master's joy, of using what things were given to me. Instead of doing that, I just sat. I just buried it. I've lost my chance. I've lost my chance. Now it's regret, weeping, gnashing his teeth. We too sometimes can lose the story we're living in, a sense of mystery, the mystery that our life is. And when we lose touch of that, we lose touch of gratitude and expectation and possibility. In the week's email, I sent a little quote from Mary Oliver's poem, The Summer's Day, which is a beautiful little poem. In it, she ends it with this. She says, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? She makes her way to that question by starting out, of all things, by thinking about a grasshopper. She's lying in the grass. She's spent a summer day hanging out with nature. She's coaxed the grasshopper to eat some sugar from her hand. She watches its mandible move sideways instead of up and down like ours. She's touched again with the wonder of this life. The grasshopper affords her a bigger picture. We're all perhaps familiar with sometimes how spending time in nature gives us a new view of things. The psalmist in Psalm chapter 8, says this. He finds the stuff of wonder and awe and mystery by looking at the natural world. It says, when I consider the heavens, the work of your hands, the moon and the stars which you set in place, what are we humans that you're mindful of us? Our kids, that you pay any attention to us. And yet, you have made us just a little lower than the gods, crowned us with glory and honor, given us dominion over all the works of your hand, put all things under our feet, all the sheep and oxen and the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fish in the sea, whatever passes in the sea. Wow, what an amazing thing. He captures this sense of our puniness in the scheme of things, but that puniness isn't a measure of our significance. No, it's inversely proportional. That even as small and seemingly insignificant we are, it's filled with glory and honor and entrusted with stewardship and responsibility for all things. Here's another great song that touches on this a little bit. It answers the question of who are we, where we've come from, where are we going. You might know it, Joni Mitchell's Woodstock. I love Crosby, Stills and Nash version of this. We are stardust, billion-year-old carbon. We're golden, but caught in the devil's bargain, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. What great lyrics. We are stardust. We are golden. And is that Joni Mitchell just engaging in playful poetry? Not really. No, actually, she's seriously answering the question, who are we and where we come from? And that answer, to answer that in this line, looking at the natural world, takes us into the realms of astrophysics and organic chemistry. You know, human life, here, we can't be who we are as humans without using some heavy metals in our bodies. We require them. Iron, copper, cobalt, nickel, magnesium, chromium, manganese, zinc. And where do all those things come from? Well, those things are forged in the belly of burning stars. And some of them can only be forged by supernovas, which happen when stars collapse upon themselves and blow apart, or two of them slide into each other. It can take billions of years for the furnaces of the stars to cycle after cycle, take the light elements like hydrogen and helium and turn them into the heavy metals that we need to be like billions of years just to collect the building material to make a human, right? And then once you've got those things, it takes million more years to come up with the amino acids and stuff that build humans, that make us not just creatures that can procreate, but ones that can reflect on the wonders of the world around us and ask questions and come up with some answers about stuff. You know, this story that we read about human origins from the book of nature, it's no less wonderful or marvelous or mysterious or awe-inspiring than the poetry in the book of Genesis. It's just that the latter one puts it on a human scale that we can understand, and it also makes explicit some theological truths about our relationship to the God who calls us into being, calls us out of nothing, and equips us with all that we need. In this grand scheme of things, our lives, 70 years, 80 years, 90, 120, like we just heard about some woman in Japan reach 119, I think. You know, in the scheme of things, they're nothing. It's nothing. Just a blip of vapor that comes and goes. Billions of years in the making. Millions of years of iteration to make us what we are. And it's over so quickly. Well, two quick observations. And one is this. The story that you live is a marvelous and mysterious one. And it's great and precious. Each day of these few short years matters. Use it well. Use it well. The passage that Diane read for us from the book of Romans says this: I appeal to you, by God's mercy, present your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your act of spiritual worship. I like the way Eugene Peterson does this in his translation or paraphrase in The Message. Here's what he says of Romans 12, 1 and 2, how he paraphrases it. So here's what I want you to do. By God's help, take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to the culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God, and you will be changed from the inside out. Readily recognizing what He wants from you and quickly respond to doing it. Unlike the culture around you, it's always trying to drag you down to its level of immaturity. Rather, God brings out the best of you and develops more well-formed maturity within you. Isn't that great? What does God want from us? That we use well these lives that He's given to us, and that we turn it over to Him for His purpose and use. Somebody once said the problem with living sacrifices is they keep wandering away from the altar. Yeah, we can do that. We can forget the story that we're living in, forget the character of the Master who's given us all we need to do what He asked us to do, to enter into His joy. So use it well, intentionally, thoughtfully, with expectation and hope and joy. And secondly, it's just this. Don't worry about what your life means. You probably don't know what your life means. The question of what's it all add up to? If I spend all my time doing this one task or that one relationship or caring for this one individual or balancing all these multiple demands, what does it add up to? Well, don't trouble yourself with that. I think we're pretty poor judges of the meaning of our life. Our perspective is too limited to know. The real meaning of our life, well, that requires an outside perspective, an omniscient perspective, something that I don't have. If my life has meaning, well, it does have meaning for me, and many times I feel that and enjoy that. Other times it's just an act of faith. I have to push aside those other storylines that whisper in my ear that say, well, it doesn't mean much. Your master's asking to reap where he hasn't sown. You haven't measured up yet. Be anxious, be worried, be disappointed, be depressed. No, don't worry about that question of meaning. It means more than we will ever understand. Let me close this with a little story about being faithful with the stuff that's in front of us and not knowing what the consequences for the wider world will be. It's a story that's told by Bill Gaither. Now, some of you with hair that's more gray than mine might know Bill Gaither. He was a kind of a country gospel singer, and his wife, Bill and Gloria Gaither, and the Gaither Trio. I don't know who the third one was. Probably a son or daughter or something. He made quite a little industry of Christian music out in Indiana and was pretty powerful in the lives of many Midwestern evangelicals. But he tells a story back from the 50s when he and his wife Gloria were first married. So they were teaching in a little school in Alexandria, Indiana, where he had grown up. And he thought it was about time for them to have a house of their own. They were looking around for some land that they could build on. And he noticed a little parcel south of town where a lot of cattle were grazing. And he learned that it belonged to a 92-year-old banker. His name was Mr. Ewell. And Mr. Ewell owned a lot of land in town. And whenever anyone asked to buy it, he gave the same answer. No, I promised the farmers they could use it for their cattle, he would say. Well, Bill says that he and Gloria went to the bank. Although he was retired, he would come and sit in the office a couple days a week, and so they met him there. And he looked over the top of his bifocals, and Bill introduced himself and asked if they could buy some land. And the old guy said, no, I'm not selling. Promised it to the farmers for grazing. When Bill Gaither pressed on a little further, he said, yeah, I know, I understand, but you see, we grew up here. I teach in the local school, and I thought maybe you'd be interested in selling your land to somebody who would be interested in settling right here in the area. The old guy pursed his lips, and he looked over his glasses. He said, what'd you say your name was? Gaither, Bill Gaither. Are you any relation to Carver Gaither? Yes, sir. He was my granddad. Well, Mr. Ewell put down his paper and he removed his glasses and he said, it's interesting. Carver Gaither, he was the best worker I ever had on the farm. Full day's work for a day's pay. Quite honest. What do you say you want to buy? So I told him again, let me do some thinking about it. So about a week later, the Gaithers go back and they talk to Mr. Ewell. Mr. Ewell says that he had the property appraised, to which Bill held his breath. The old guy says, how does 3,800 sound? Well, this is in the 50s, you know. And Bill thinks, whoa, if that's 3,800 an acre, I've got to raise another $60,000. 3,800? I repeated. Yep. 15 acres, 3,800. Whoa. Well, didn't have to be repeated. He jumped on it. They built a house. Decades and decades later, Bill was on that land, strolling on the hills, looking out over the hills and with his son, Benji. He said to his son, he said, you know, you've had this beautiful place to grow up on. to walk in these hills, this home, this town to be a part of. And it was through nothing that you had done, but because the good name of a great-granddad that you never met. What do our lives mean? What do they add up to? I think the better part of the harvest isn't for us to know. What is for us to know is to live faithfully, diligently, with good hope and cheer, using the stuff that has been entrusted to us. If you're like me, there's always more there than I'm aware of, more to invest, more opportunity to take advantage of, more I can do. I got an email note this week from John Houston, who reminded me of a great little quote from Madeleine Albright, whose life the world is celebrating these days. Said this: "Be in a hurry to do the most good." That's great. So let me end with this question. It's a smash up of Annie Dillard and Mary Oliver together. Here it is. Just tell me, what do you plan to do with your one and wild and precious day? What will you do with this one wild and precious day? Might we find our ways into answering that in ways that are keeping with the good gift that it is? I invite you now